Hello, everyone. My name is Martha Lorena Hernández Flores, and I am a third year PhD student with a concentration in special education at Florida International University, located in my hometown, Miami, Florida. I am here on behalf of the Council for Exceptional Children's Teacher Education Division's Diversity Caucus. Dr. Ambra Green is joining us today for the video spotlight. Thank you for meeting with us today, Dr. Green. How are you doing?
Thank you. I'm doing well. Thank you for having me. It's such a privilege. So I'm looking forward to talking with you today.
Awesome. Well, allow me to introduce you to our audience. Dr. Green is an associate professor of special education within the Department of Curriculum and Instruction at the University of Texas at Arlington. She is a national scholar with publications and research focused on students of color with and at risk for disabilities. Dr. Green's research focuses on issues related to equitable school practices, behavior disorders, positive behavior intervention supports, and teachers' use of evidence-based practices. Dr. Green is the primary investigator of a $1.1 million project funded by the U.S. Department of Education Office of Special Education Programs, or OSEP for short. The grant supports preparation for master's training to social work students and special education teachers to support K-12 students with disabilities and high intensity needs. Sounds like a really great project, Dr. Green.
Thank you.
And prior to her work in higher education, Dr. Green was a middle school special education teacher and PBIS coach. That's a great, I was also a middle school teacher, so.
All right, good. We're kindred spirits.
Exactly. So, Dr. Green, your research, service, and teaching provide valuable insights in the field of special education. Today, we would like to learn more about your practice as a teacher educator. Can you begin by telling us a little bit about your role in your institution and your scholarly interests? And also, what are your goals as a teacher educator?
Sure. So my role here at UTA or University of Texas at Arlington, UTA for short, is I'm an associate professor of special education. Of course, I'm responsible for research, teaching, and practice. As a teacher, I teach students in our special education programs, our undergraduate and graduate program. And previously, which I'll talk about a little later, is I would teach some of our general education majors, so students who wanted to be general education teachers as well. And so with my scholarly interests, predominantly around disrupting the preschool to prison pipeline in ways through teacher preparation, through policy, development or revisions, and through teacher preparation and with in-service teachers and pre-service teachers is the way that I try to dismantle that. And so my goal as a teacher educator is to prepare teachers or pre-service teachers to disrupt the preschool to prison pipeline, just as I try to do with my research. My goal is to train pre-service teachers to be advocates and to be scholars that are continuously aware of what's happening in our society and in our school buildings, particularly with a critical perspective of the students that they are teaching and looking at the systems that are in their school and challenging the status quo of what has always just been done in schools and in districts. I want to train, or my goal is to train our teacher educators, whether they're general education or SPED teachers, but again, to disrupt that preschool to prison pipeline that too many of our marginalized students are entrapped with.
Yes, that is very critical work.
Yeah.
That leads to our next question. We know that training teachers to respond to diversity and equity issues can be challenging. What challenges have you faced and how have you overcome them? In other
Yeah.
words, oh,
Oh,
I'm
I'm sorry, go
sorry.
ahead.
Yeah, in other other words, are there keys to success that you would share with junior scholars interested in teaching for diversity, equity, and inclusion?
Yeah. So um, I know that going into, and as you just mentioned in your question, when teaching any type of diversity or equity or inclusion course, you just have to know that you are going to face some pushback. Because if we talk about any of these same issues in our social environments, there's pushback. So we have to know that that is going to trickle down into
Yeah.
institutes of higher education where you have students who are thinkers and they're dealing with critical issues, and critical in the meaning of uh, things that are just going on in our community that are important. So you have to
Yeah.
understand and know that there's going to be pushback from students, and that's what I tend to face most often. And I don't necessarily see that as something that is negative. I actually see sometimes that it is the students are just struggling with the content. They're struggling with what they've always been taught. And now you're bringing them some new information about a different race or a different ethnicity that they never considered. And so they're struggling with the content, and that's what higher education is for. So I kind of welcome that. And another thing that allows in the classroom environment is it allows for others in the room who may not be speaking up or um, kind of asking questions or challenging the content to hear the conversations and the arguments from both sides, knowing that in the future they're likely going to you know be poised with that particular question or um, situation in their teaching. So it's good all around, and especially it's challenging depending on what state you might be in. So depending on what politics are happening in your state, I teach in Texas, and so where it's a very politically charged environment. Another thing is depends on what institute of higher education that you're teaching in. Some institutes of higher education are predominantly white institutions. Some are Hispanic serving institutions. Some are historically Black colleges and universities. And so, or some are liberal arts colleges. So, just knowing the population that you're serving, you are likely going to receive more or less pushback because of the understanding and that comes with may come with, I don't want to generalize, but may come with a particular population of individuals. And so what I would recommend and say to junior scholars who are interested in teaching these types of courses is, you know, walk into that course knowing that there will be challenges and pushbacks, but also, just a little something to think about is likely you may not be so happy with your teacher evaluations at some points, and the research shows that, especially if you are a woman of color or if you are a man of color or individual of color, then sometimes teaching those diversity courses you receive lower teacher evaluations than whether if there was maybe whether my white colleague taught the course. So you just have to know that, have the literature to back that up. And
Mm-hmm.
when if there's any evaluations or questions that are had by your chair or dean or whatever, you have the research to prove that this is just how tends to be what happens when um, people of color tend to teach those courses.
Mm-hmm. Well, thank you so much for sharing very practical
But
tips, right? Very
yeah,
practical. Yes, like be prepared. That's the reality.
yeah,
Anytime I guess you teach anything that is critical, that it challenges the status quo. So thank you for that, and also thank you for the tips on being prepared to address that with administration, with your administration, right? And to be aware that that there are I don't want to say consequences, but things will happen, so be prepared for it.
Yep.
Thank you for sharing those tips.
Mhm.
Um, so, Dr. Green, wanted you to talk a little bit about your involvement with TED, the Teacher Education Division of the CC, and how it has benefited your teaching. What do you see as a role of organizations like the Diversity Caucus in navigating the challenges of teacher education?
Yeah, so well, being involved with TED has allowed me to stay abreast of the research and practices that are implemented in our field of teacher preparation, specifically in special education teacher preparation. And whereas my work is a little more, I wouldn't say siloed, but I tend to work with preparing teachers to teach students with behavior disorders. That's my area. But
Mm-hmm.
being involved with TED, it allows me to continually refresh my knowledge on the other areas of just pedagogy, of teacher preparation, and what else is happening in the field of teacher preparation or special educator preparation. And branches like the Diversity Caucus are really helpful in supporting and training, I feel, of doc students who are wanting to go into, like you mentioned earlier, junior scholars or doc students who are wanting to go into the field and teach diversity types of courses and things like that. So that's a place for them to hear from researchers who are doing this type of work out in the field related to diversity and equity, and just to kind of hone in on some skills and knowledge. But also, regardless if that's anyone's, the doc students or anyone's potential research line, regardless of their interests, we should all be cognizant of how diversity, equity, and inclusion affects our work. So the diversity caucus is important in that aspect, as anyone who wanting to research um, teaching students with learning disabilities in math or writing or anything like that. There should still be some understanding of how diversity and equity and inclusion may affect that work. So the Diversity Caucus is really important, a really important branch or caucus in TED, for that reason. That's just one reason, but for that reason.
That's a great point, right? That we want, I mean, the point of diversity, equity, and inclusion is for it to happen everywhere,
Right.
not just in the diversity caucus, but
Right.
all areas of teacher education and teacher preparation.
Mm-hmm.
Thank you for sharing that. I have one last question. We would like to know who are up and coming scholars you're reading. What do you find most compelling about their scholarship?
Okay. Well, I can think of two, just like off the top of my head, that I find that they're up and coming. I might even say that they're they're there, right? Whoever
They're
there
here.
is. But I enjoy the work of Elizabeth Bettini and or Dr. Elizabeth Bettini and Dr. LaRon Scott. First, because Dr. Bettini researches teacher work conditions, sped teacher work conditions. And that's
Mhm.
so often left out, I think, in our conversations of teacher retention.
Yeah.
So that's very important, especially teacher retention of, which is what then Dr. Scott looks at, teacher retention of marginalized or people from marginalized backgrounds, our
Mhm.
Black teachers, our Latinx teachers. And so those are two scholars that I would say that I am following their work and making sure that I'm aware of that line or that body of research, to make sure that I share with my students, but also that it informs my research and how I also serve the field of special education.
Great. I love those two scholars as well. Um, Definitely contributing to our understanding, right, of diversity, equity, inclusion, and also, like you said, teacher work conditions, because we can't talk about teacher anything without talking about work conditions.
Right.
Very important. Yes, thank you for sharing that. So,
Mhm.
thank you so much, Dr. Green, for meeting with us today. I really enjoyed our chat.
Sure, you're welcome. I did too. And again, thanks. It's an honor to be able to talk to you all, and thanks again.
Yes, of course. So at this time, I'd like to invite all our viewers to check out other special education scholars in our video project series. You can also meet many of the featured scholars and many others at the TED 2022 Annual Conference in Richmond, Virginia, November 8th through the 11th. See you all at TED 2022.